you might recall in the 1980s, the Japan-US relationship was very, very fraught. We had a
Oh yes.
structural impediments dialogue with Japan because of the distortions in their economy that was leading to damage to US producers. So we've had this sort of issue with us since the 80s. What happened in the 90s was, I mean, I think we made a fundamental assumption. Those of us that are involved in the transitions in these countries, we assumed that as the former Soviet Union entered the international trading system, we assumed that we open up trade at the border and we open them up to international organizations and so forth. Same is true of Latin America after the Apertura in September 92, India after import substitution ended in 1991. We just assumed that the competition inside the border would automatically follow.
Mm,
Economic democracy would automatically follow that. Political democracy would automatically follow that. And of course, none of that happened.
yes.
And in fact, what happened was the gatekeepers of the economy tended to become very enriched. And they then lobbied for all kinds of regulatory protection, all kinds of distortions in their own economies that prevented new entrants from succeeding and damaged consumers in those countries. And so through the 90s and 2000s, you had this sort of steady build-up of opposition to the liberalization that was, at its high point, I think, when the Uruguay round concluded in 1994 in the WTO, and we had this big WTO agreement. We had NAFTA in 1994 at the same time. We were launching the negotiations for a free trade area of the Americas around that time as well, building on the NAFTA. But at the same time, underneath the surface, all these objections were building up in domestic publics. And the first sort of sign of this was the election of Hugo Chavez in
Mm,
Venezuela, where the Venezuelans essentially said, look, I thought the liberalization was going to help me. In fact, I see some people getting very rich and I'm getting,
right.
comparatively poorer. That wasn't true. They were actually improving. They just weren't improving as much as some of the vested interest incumbent elites, were getting. And their reaction was to throw the whole thing out and elect somebody like Chavez in Venezuela. We then had the Seattle ministerial riots in 1999, and we stopped doing serious trade liberalization at that point, and we haven't resumed at a multilateral level.